Okay, so everyone, thank you for joining our Tech Talk session, UI Frameworks Tech Talk session. This time we're hosting Noam. I apologize. This time we're hosting Noam and Yoni from Remult dev team. They are both are the founders of this very cool full stack solution, which we'll demonstrate right away. I thank you all for joining. This is an open mic session, so feel free to share your questions, remarks, whatever you like. It's not like a strict lecture. We are all here for learning purposes, and any question will be welcomed. I guess with no further hesitations, Noam, the stage is yours.
Okay, thank
And
you.
just one last thing, I would like to thank you both, Yoni and Noam, for joining us today. It's not trivial at all that you invest from your personal time to join us and to demonstrate your solution for us. And thank you very much in the name of all of us.
Thank you very much. We're happy to be here. So nice to meet you, everybody. I'm Noam, and with me is also Yoni, my co-founder. And today I'm going to talk to you about writing full stack application without repeating yourself. The idea here is that we want to have the power to write an end-to-end application as easy as possible. Let me start by introducing myself. I'm the founder and CEO of Firefly Migration, which I founded with Yoni 16 years ago. We do a lot of .NET development there. In recent years, our focus shifted toward TypeScript and Node.js project. We've participated in many open source projects and NGOs projects, projects for social activities, whatever the translation for that goes. The main one is Chagai, which I'll describe a little bit later. I work with a 55-inch 4K screen. Strongly recommend it if you can afford it. It's amazing. I started with 2 screens, went all the way up to 8, and then decided to just have one big with another one or two small at the side.
Why not merge them both into one screen?
Yeah, that's the idea. I resented the black lines between the screens, so I decided to just grow this big. This is my desktop on which I'm talking to you right now. And if you're all wondering what's this cool logo here on the left, it's the logo of the small town I live in called Even Yehuda, which somehow came up with this amazingly cool logo. Um, so I've been an enterprise application developer for my entire career. I've written applications for insurance, banking, retail, accounting, pretty much anything. Started with DOS, moved up to desktop applications and web applications. And as time went by, I found myself in a position where I had large applications with hundreds of entities, and the code was scattered all around. And that became even worse when you start developing for the web because everything is on the front-end code, on the back-end code, on storage code, back and forth, back and forth. There's no single source of truth in my code. When I needed to look for some rules, I had to investigate many, many, many files. And to make things worse, everything became all sorts of boilerplate codes that we need to follow. Like if I want to support CRUD operation, I need to have put, post, delete, multiple versions of get, all of those repeating themselves, all of those with validations, all of those with checks. So much code that literally does nothing and requires me to maintain it all the time. I wanted to have a single source of truth. I want to have a set of TypeScript entities that define everything from the route to the client to the database. Everything is done with them. I wanted to have a code sharing, real code sharing. We're using Node.js, we support TypeScript. I didn't want to write things twice anymore. So I want to have code sharing of types, validations, authorizations, and I wanted to be minimally intrusive. I want to play nice with others. So it has to be completely within my controls. I don't want any backend as a service or some kind of JSON generated files. I want to have simple Node.js application, simple React application at the front end. Just make it easy. We don't want code generation or boilerplate code or config files. All of those gave us a headache. So with that in mind, Yoni and I started working on our little framework, and we were looking for somewhere to test it, and we were looking for guinea pigs, and we didn't want any customers. So we decided to go and write some charity application. We found an NGO nearby that distributes food for people in need. And we thought, hey, people still do that on paper. Here's a cool problem to solve. And we created a small app that optimizes the routes for the volunteers and gives them an app so they can navigate and communicate back when they delivered or not. And we developed a full backend for the NGO to manage everything. And we started small, and little by little we grew. And then COVID came and exploded. During COVID in Israel, elderly people were not allowed to go to the grocery shop. So you had to deliver. The government took ownership of delivering food to the elderly people's homes. Millions of food deliveries were done using this application. The army used it, the municipalities used it, NGO used it. We got some great scale testing for Remult, making sure that it works on great scale and that it's secure. It went through multiple penetration tests by the army to make sure that we're not exposing private information. And we've done all of this on Heroku servers that cost me $16 a month. Currently we're distributing 500,000 food parcels, food deliveries, even more parcels per year, while paying $16 a month for hosting and database, which I love. And this fun little side project ended up awarding us the Presidential Award for Volunteer in 2020. And it was a lot of fun. We're very, very proud of that. So once this all stabilized, Yoni and I decided to give back to the community and started writing some docs and some tutorials and polished the API and announced Remult on Hacker News just a month ago and ended up with this beautiful chart, which we're going to try and keep up in these dimensions. So all that's fun, but as Linus Torvalds said, talk is cheap, show me the code. So what I would like to do with you guys today, I would like to take a React application, which is front-end only, with the state stored in React, and refactor it to become a full-stack application. So this is our to-do app. We're using the to-do MVC template, which looks pretty nice. And this is the source code. We're using Vite here as the CLI. And we have here the front-end folder with the app TS6, which we can see here, and the task TS that we can see over here. Just before, if anyone finds the font too small or if something is difficult to follow, just ping me, say something or say something on the chat, and I'll
I
try
think we
to
can
adjust.
enlarge it by one step, I guess,
Okay,
if possible.
so yes, this is
Yeah.
okay?
Yeah, perfect.
Okay, cool.
Perfect.
So we
Thanks.
have this nice, my pleasure. So we have this nice to-do app where I can add a task. I can check it as completed. I can delete it if I want. I can see all tasks or filter just the active ones. I can set all tasks to be completed or not. All of it is stored in the state of the component. Let's go through the code a little bit. Here we define the tasks and the initial values for them. We have new task, which is this part, with the create new task method that basically creates an object and sets it to the array. We have the editing task. If I go and edit something, it switches to editing mode. And we have the hide completed that controls this filtering. We have the set all method that is triggered here. And here we have the HTML, the input from the top, the list with the filter to react to this. We have a read-only view for the task, the ones that we're seeing right now, with the delete and check completed. And we have an edit view that has the input. Like when we start editing, we get it like this. And at the bottom, we have the say it had completed false and true. So we want to take this app and turn it into a full stack app. And actually, the tests that we see here are the ones that we're going to follow as an agenda. So we've done most, we're going to do a bit more of the setup. We're going to explain what entities are. We're going to do paging, sorting, filtering on the backend, of course, CRUD operations, validations, backend method, database. And if time would allow, we'll also do some authentication, authorization, and even deployment if we have enough time. So let's start by creating our backend. So under the source folder, I'm going to add a new folder and call it backend. And in that folder, I'm going to add an index ts. And here I'm going to say const app equals express and import express. I've done all the npim's in advance, so forgive me for not installing them in front of you. I didn't want you guys to wait, but I have a list in the README for everything, so you'll be able to follow it. And then I'm going to say app listen 3002 console log started. So this is the most basic Express web server. let's go ahead and activate it. So I'm going to stop Vite, and I'm going to do npm run dev, which going to run npm run dev, which going to run concurrently and have two processes running at the same time. One is Vite in green, marking the web, and one is API, which is this express. And we can see here that it typed started. So if I'm going to say smiley over here, you're going to see that it will recycle, run it again, and update the name. Cool. So now we have the backend. Next, let's take the task interface and put it in a shared folder so we can share the type between the front end and the backend. So I'm going to go to source. I'm going to create a shared folder, and I'm going to drag the task over into it. And I'm going to check that VS Code doesn't have stupid bugs, which it does. So I'll fix it. And then I'm going to look at this interface. Let's just clear the screen so we can give it the room that it needs. In the original project, this is just a simple interface. But now I want this to be a full entity. I want it to control the API, the front-end API, the back-end API, the data structure, everything. So I'm going to turn it into a class. I'm going to give it default values. And I'm going to decorate it with the entity decorator from Remult. The entity decorator tells Remult to expose this task as a task endpoint and to make sure that it does everything I've just said. We can configure it using the options object. And there's a lot of configurations and hook where we can intervene, but we'll start by allowing the full CRUD capabilities for anyone. Later, we'll restrict that based on authorization and authentication. Then I'm going to decorate the fields with their respective definitions. For example, I want the ID to be a UUID, I want the title to be a string, and I want the completed to be a Boolean. By decorating these fields, I'm letting Remult know what data types to use in the database, which validations to do on the API layer and pretty much anywhere, and also allows me to expose OpenAPI and GraphQL if I ever want to. So after defining this entity, we need to expose it in our Express app. So let's go to next to the index, we'll create a new file called API-TS. And here we'll say import Remult, Remult Express. And we're going to say export const API equals Remult Express. And in the entities, we'll register the task entities that we've just defined. So this is something we need to do once per project. And in the entities array, we'll list all the entities that we want to expose to the API. And we'll go back to the backend and here say Express app use our API. Let's save this. And now we see that once the backend has restarted, it added an API tasks endpoint. Okay, which means with these simple lines of code, now tasks support a full API. And we can query that API using a tool similar to Postman. We're going to say localhost 3002 API tasks, and we get an empty array. Cool. Next thing we want to do, we want to seed it with some data because we don't want to type anything. So the Remult Express has a property or a method called init API, which receives a Remult object. The init API method will be called once the server is set up and the database is initialized and everything is ready. And here we can write some startup code. So we're going to say const task repo equals remult.repo of task. Now, this is something that we're going to repeat a lot in this demo. You can see that the Remult repo of task returns a repository of type task. We're going to use that repository to query data, to filter, to update, to change. That's going to be the object we'll use for all the interaction with the task entity. So I can say here, for example, if await task repo count is 0, which means if there are no rows, let's insert some data. Okay. And now I'll go over to the app.tsx, take the data that we used over here, delete it. So first we'll see that the UI became empty. And we'll go over to the API-TS and place the data over there. And as soon as we restart, because once we save, we restart, we'll now And we have now inserted the data, and we can explore that via the Postman, or the equivalent of Postman, see that we have a data in our GET request. Now, as for the database, at this early stage of development, I like to use simple JSON files. So we can see we have a folder called DB, and in it we have the task.json, where we can see the existing data. Later in this presentation, we're going to move that to use MongoDB or Postgres or any other DBs that we want. But for starting a project, JSON is great, and the change is minimal between different data providers. Okay, so we've defined task as an entity, we've set up an API, we've inserted test data. Now let's go play with the front end. Let's go do some React. So this is our front end folder with our app.tsx, and I'm going to add a file here called common.ts. And in it, I'll define Axios. Now I'm using Axios for this demo, but obviously it's not required. You can use fetch, you can use anything else you like.
Any HTTP, right? Any
Yeah.
HTTP client.
Correct, any HTTP client. And here I'm going to say export const remult equals new remult that receives Axios as a parameter. Great. So this will be used by the front end to consume information from the backend. Let's go to our app.tsx. And just like before, we're going to say const task repo equals remult repo of task. And then we can say function fetch tasks, and we'll return task repo.find. So the find method will return all the tasks in this repository. Later, we'll show how to fine grain this. And in our app itself, we can say here, use effect. And in the use effect, we're going to say fetch tasks, then set tasks. Now we have the data. Okay. Notice how the same repos that we've used on the backend to interact with the database is now used in the front end to interact with the backend. Okay. We're using the same test type and the same writing style for both front end and backend. And I think that empowers us to, to do anything we want. Next, I want to talk to you about the different functionality of find. Okay, find.
May I ask a question?
Yes, please.
Is that assumes that the server is on the same machine in a specific port? Because I didn't see anywhere that you configure the server IP and the
client
port,
IP.
And the client IP and the port here when you call fetch tasks.
Perfect question. Let me show you what we've done.
Defaults?
Yeah, so I'm going to review that right now. It's a great question. Thank you so much for asking. I love questions that make sure that everyone is with us. So as you've seen, I've defined the server on port 3002. And in this current setup, I'm using a proxy between Vite and the server to send a request between them. I've configured that proxy in the Vite config.js. Okay, so whenever a request comes to /API, it's being forwarded to our Express server. Did that answer your question?
Tough. I need to think about this configuration because I'm not so used. Okay.
You can okay, so this is what we've done in this demo, and by default, this setup builds on the fact that it's the same server is going to return the eventually when we deploy, the same server will return both the static files and the API. Of course, this can change. It's just a default setting. If you want to say to put any other address for it, you can say remult API-based URL, and then here, put whatever website you want where the data will be stored at the end. So the default works based on a subfolder with proxy, but you can change it to be anything you like. Is that better?
Thank you.
Okay, perfect. Thank you. Okay, so going back to our app.tsx, the find method by default returns everything, but it is quite powerful. I can say, for example, limit 4, and it will return the top 4. Let's review the network tab. And limit 3, we can see that it issues a request to the server. So the APIs that automatically gets created is quite complex with quite a lot of functionalities built in it. So I can say limit 4, page 2, page 3. I can say order by, completed ascending or descending. And the correct URL request will be generated. It's standard REST request between the front end and the back end, and it's all typed in the code. Okay, so if I say completed with some kind of spelling mistake, it will let me know. We can also filter. I can say where completed is true or false or undefined to say no filter at all. Okay, so defined is quite powerful and supports server-side sorting, paging, filtering, etc. And now in our original app, we have an active only and all setting over here that restricts the rows that I see. We can easily change that to be server-side filtering. Let's do that. So for the fetch task, I'm going to input hide completed Boolean. And here we have the state that controls the filtering. So we're going to say use effect hide completed here and here. And now when you click on active and all, and yeah, we need to implement it here. So I'll say if hide completed only shows the ones where completed is false, otherwise don't filter at all. Cool. So if I click active, I'll get only the ones where completed is equal to false. And if I click all, I will get them all. Okay, so we've completed setup, entities, paging, sorting, and filtering. But one of the obvious things that don't work is that if I refresh the browser now, the state will not get saved. We didn't support CRUD operations on the backend. So let's go ahead and add those. The first thing I want to do is whenever I check here, I want it to be saved to the backend. So I'm going to scroll down and find the setCompleted method. Here we are. And so we are creating an updated task here with the original test data and completed. And then we are setting the array of tasks based with the updated tasks. So what I'm going to do here, I'm going to say await task repo.save and send it the task. Okay, now since save is already typed, I don't even need the task type here on the left. Let's save this. And now when I check something, you see a put request goes to the backend. And if I refresh it, it will actually be saved. Let's go and open the tasks JSON file because it's always fun to look at data changes. So as I click, you can see that the data changes in real time on the backend. Cool. Next, let's support adding a new task. So let's go to create task and do pretty much the same thing there.
Rob,
Task repo. Yes, go ahead.
can you show, maybe you showed that before, where you defined that the JSON used the Remult as a database?
Okay, so let me go there. On the API TS, one of the options that Remult Express gets the parameter is data provider. Okay. By default, if no data provider is set, we use a JSON data provider that automatically saves for the /db folder. That's a good place to start with when we start an app. Later in this presentation, when we'll reach
It will be
database,
a MongoDB in the data provider, or
correct, Mongo or
Postgres.
Postgres or MySQL or anything you can imagine.
Thanks.
Happy to. I actually even done an implementation once that uses Google Docs or Google Sheets as a database. I needed that for some project. Okay, so back to our app TS6, let's handle the insert. So on create new task, we're going to do await task repo dot insert of the task. And again, we don't need the typing. So I prefer implied typing whenever I can. So I can say here new task and one more new task. And we can see that when we post them, there's a post call to the backend, and these tasks are added and saved. Of course, now we want to delete this garbage. So let's go ahead and implement the delete method. So it's quite simple, task repo, delete, and send it a task. So now delete will issue a delete call to the backend, and those gets deleted. And the last thing we need is that when we edit some data, the data will be saved to the backend. So we're going to go to save task, and we're going to say const save task equals await task repo dot save of editing task. And in the when we refresh the array, we're going to replace the saved task in it, the ones that got back from the backend with any updates that also happened there. So we're going to say here, saved task. Let's do that. Make some change, leave, and see that it's saved. And just like before, let's review it here. We can see that it was saved, bring it back, and we can see that it was saved. So I think we're about 20 minutes in to the code demo, and we've already completed the entire set of CRUD operations. We created a backend, we created a CRUD endpoint, and we wrote very, very little code to do that. So you didn't see a lot of boilerplate code, things that needs to get maintained. That's the beauty of it. Like most CRUD work is this. And once you have this, you save yourself of so much stupid code to write.
Indeed, and some shared types between the client and server, which is also quite powerful.
Yes. Yes. Cool. The next important topic is validation, because what is data without validation? And it's also a concern that...
Validation.
Yes, go ahead.
Question, please.
Yes, go ahead.
If you have a like more complex data structure, which is not a single document, and you need to enhance your CRUD operations, is that something which is possible with this framework?
Yes. Yes, you can define more complex data types in the entity itself. Like, if you have the task entity here, you can use different decorator to use more complicated data types. It can be many-to-one references to other entities. It can be complex JSON structures that can be saved over here. So the short answer is yes. You also have hooks for saving and deleting, where you can create your own custom logic to save some of them if you want to spread them around. Okay?
Okay, thanks.
Cool. So validation. Validation is also a concern that I found annoying. You need to write validation in the front end because you want to give the user a compelling user interaction, and then you need to write validation at the back end because someone can hijack your APIs and you want to make sure that everything works. This is one of those things that I wish there was a single source of truth for. So in Remult, you can do that. I can use these decorators to configure anything I want to do. In this case, I'm going to configure this one. You can control if it can get updated, deep read only, many different settings, but I'm going to focus on validate, and I'm going to use a built-in validators called required. Now I'm using a built-in validator, but you can create your own. It's a simple arrow function, and I'll do that in a few seconds. But just by adding this line of code, okay, let me clear here the network tab so you'll see that it works. I'll delete the validation text. I'll try to leave the field. It doesn't leave the field. Notice that the network tab is empty, so I didn't make any calls to the backend. But in the front end, if we look at console, we can see that we got an error. Okay, so that error has a message and also has a model state that represents every field and the error that we've received for it. We can use that later to create a more compelling UI. So front-end validation just happens when we define it in the task. And we can achieve the same on the backend. So if I'll go to our nice little Postman replacement and say post and give it a body with title blank and run it, we'll get validation done also on the backend. So we write the validations once and they occur both on the front end and the back end and are defined in our single source of truth, which is the task. Now, the fact that we return a well-structured error gives us the benefit of using it in our UI. I'll enhance our editing task data structure to also have an optional error member of type error info of task. And then in our save, I will add a try catch. And I will set the editing task to be editing task plus the error. And now next to the input, I can put a span with the arrow. Arrow, model state, title. Notice I can refer the same member, okay? And that way, if you have multiple fields in your form, you can put the correct arrow next to the correct input and achieve a better user experience. So let's refresh that. Create invalid data, try to leave it, and we get the error in place.
Noam,
Okay.
another question. What happens with other languages? Because here you got the error in as a string in English.
Mm-hmm.
If you want to use different languages, it's like Are you a multi-language, or do you have another way option to return some code?
Yes.
We can translate it on the client.
So the answer is yes on all aspects. Okay. Yes, you can create some code, return it to the client and translate it there. Yes, you can configure the errors to be multilingual. Let me show you how I can also customize the validation logic. Let's go and have a look in our task here. And let's say that I don't like this pre-built validator required with the pre-built message. I want to write some custom code here. So I'm going to make a type here so we'll know exactly the types that we're using. And I'm going to say task and say here if task title length is less than 5, throw to short. Okay. And let's see how that works. We get the to short without going to the backend, and we can achieve the same logic here when we call the post call. Now, getting back to your question about multilingual, this is the place where I can control also in the backend to return a message in the correct language of the one that the user is currently using. Like, for example, if we take the food distribution app we discussed earlier, it is used in Israel, in Australia, in Bulgaria. So it has versions in Hebrew, in English, in Italian, in Spanish, and it all returns the correct messages based on the different environment, based on logics that we've written. Now, since this is a simple arrow function, you can refactor it and reuse it, so you can very quickly refactor the multilingual problem away from your code. Does that make sense?
Yes, it does.
Perfect, thank you. Also, once you touch on that, I'll have to expand a little bit more. Even the caption of a field is something that you have scattered all across your code. Whereas here you can place the caption as one of the metadata of the field, and you can say it in Hebrew, like, koteret, or any other thing, and then use it in your code. Okay, so you can create a single source of truth for many other aspects that are relevant to the entity and use it anywhere in your code. You can even extend that based on your custom needs. Cool. So we have on our checklist validations. Great. The next thing that we didn't yet implement is the set all. Like when we click this, it currently sets everything, and when we click it again, it sets everything, but it does so only on the front end. And we want to refactor it to also happen on the back end. Sorry, also happen on this structure, on the CRUD implementation. So let's go to our app.tsx. This is the set all method, which is quite naive at this point. The first thing we need to change, currently this runs on the tasks that are in the front end. But now we can only see part of the data, so we may only have these 4 tasks and we want to update them all. So we'll change this logic, first of all, to iterate the entire row set, and later we'll play with it some more. So I'm going to do for task of await task repo dot find. We get all the tasks and we iterate them. And we're going to say here await task repo dot save of task, comma, completed. And when it's done, we're going to fetch the tasks with the hide completed and set tasks. Cool. So now when I click on this, it will go and update them all and refresh the tasks. Cool. Now, obviously, this takes a while. And someone who likes looking at the network tab will say, what, are you crazy? You're sending so many put requests to the backend. This may work well on 10 tasks, but on 10,000 tasks, this can be problematic. And this is another place where Remult shines. We can take code, play with it in the front end, and then very easily refactor it to run in the backend. So let's go ahead and do that. I'll go to the shared folder, and I'll add a new item called task controller. I'm going to say export class task controller. And then I'm going to take the code from the front end and copy it to the backend. I'm going to adjust the syntax of the method call itself. It's going to be static, async. But as you can see, it's essentially the same method. But now I'm going to decorate it with the backend method decorator. The backend method decorator tells the code that whenever this method is called, never execute it in the front end. Do an API call to the backend to run this code instead. Okay, and I can also define who is allowed to run it. Currently everyone, but later when we'll do authentication and authorization, we can control that in a single point. And it also injects for us a Remult object that we can use in the context of the backend. So we'll do const task repo remult repo of task. And the code stays essentially the same. Now, for us to be able to call it, we need to also register it in our API. So we're going to do here controllers and task controller. As soon as we register it, we can see in our APIs that we have now the set all method. Okay. And if we switch over to the app TSX, we can now do await task controller dot set all completed. Let's run it. And you can see that it runs much faster. Okay. And it performs the work on the backend. It just makes a post request to the backend to execute this. So we see here how we can, because we're using the same concept of repository, both in the front end and the backend, we can easily play around with code in the front end, refactor it to the backend, and vice versa based on what we need. We can even have the same code, sometimes run like this, sometimes run like that, based on conditional logic. Okay, so it's no longer that big of a boundary between the technologies we use in the front end and the backend. We can now write them both with the same ease and move back and forth.
Norman, I must say that it a bit confuses because when you first look at the functions, you don't know whether it runs on the client or on the server. In terms of readability, this is my my feeling.
I understand.
Just want to add one last thing. The fetch task is also like redundant, right? Because you already know everything on the client. It issues another GET request.
Yes and no, because I can be in a position where the client only sees part of the rows. Okay. And then it's not aware of the entire set of tasks. But calling it again or not, it's a decision you're going to do as a developer. This is more about React or the specific implementation. And here I'm trying to show the general force of it. I agree with you that when you see this for the first time, you don't see an Axios put or Axios post or some other HTTP calls that you do. But usually when I do this kind of code, I anyhow hide it in some kind of service. Okay, when I write front-end code in React, so
it's like on the first glance you don't know whether it runs on the client or on the server. You cannot tell from this code.
I understand that.
It a bit confuses the reader.
Do you think that solving it with a naming convention is an option?
Maybe that's an option.
Okay. On the other hand, another benefit that you do get here is typing end-to-end. Okay, because this is, a typed call. If I try send it a string, I will get a compile time error. So it has this kind of plus side. And I can tell you from my experience, I use naming convention for that. I do, a controller will usually be something that runs on the backend. So that's how I've faced that issue so far. But it's a valid point. I fully agree. Okay, cool. So we've done setup, entities. Yeah, let's show all. We've done entities, paging, CRUD, validation, backend method. Let's go ahead and play with the database. Are there any other questions before I move on to database? I'll take that as a no. Okay, so Remult supports multiple databases. Let me just jump over to an article on this. We have on our Remult website, which we encourage you to come and visit. We have the different database article where we can use Postgres, MySQL, MongoDB, SQLite, Microsoft SQL Server, Oracle, and pretty much any other database you want to create. There's a very simple interface to implement as a database, and you can then present yourself as a database. So we're going to go now and change our database to be MongoDB. So I'll start by importing a few things from Remult Mongo data provider, and I'm going to import from MongoDB the MongoDB client. Now, obviously, you guys are more experienced with this than I am, but I'm playing around. Data provider. Okay, so here we need to define our MongoDB. I'm going to do const client equals new Mongo client and the connection string. I'm going to await the connection. And then I'm going to return a Mongo data provider that gets a DB and the client. It would be nice here. And proper typing is also key here. Okay. So when I set the data provider, I basically am returning an object that supports the data provider interface, and it can be any database that implements that interface. And this is how we connect to Mongo client. I'll save it. And as soon as the database restart, you can see now that we are getting fresh data because it was stored to MongoDB. And let's go and get Mongo to look at. So we'll ask it to refresh, and we have a new to-do collection, and it has tasks, and we can see the tasks over here. And as we set the tasks and refresh, we can see that the updates go all the way to the database. So the other advantages of using Remult repository is that I can switch database with ease. I can start developing with JSON, move to Mongo, switch to Postgres, anything I want. Also in the front end, we have the same support for local storage, for SQL, WebSQL in the front end, and IndexedDB is currently in development. So we don't care as developers about the underlying implementation. Our code is easy to write, and the implementation is an implementation detail. So far, so good.
Awesome.
Let's talk about authentication and authorization.
Noam,
Yes, go ahead.
if you have like any, not a CRUD API that you want to implement in the backend, so you just write it normally on the Express and then call it with the Axios?
Yes, so you have both options to do that. One is write it normally in the Express. You have full control over the Express over here in Index. So you can say like, app get my URL and do something. That's one option for you to go. Another option to go is to use the backend method that gives you end-to-end typing. Okay, so you can, just like we've created the backend method here for set all, I can create any other call and get typing all the way back and forth, even without using the CRUD entities API.
I see, thanks.
Okay.
Guys, before moving on to the authentication and authorization, I encourage you guys to ask any question you like so far. Feel free to jump in and open the mic.
Now, before we get to the authentication, how the relation between data work?
Okay. So we have over here we use basic data types. Okay. We can also use more complex data types and even other entities as data type. I can create, for example, a user entity, and then here do something like a create user of type user, okay? And have a many-to-one relation built into the entity itself. We have articles on how to do that on our website, including all the different relations. So, you see here relations between entities, and you see all the different implementations of those. I encourage you to visit this website afterward. And also we have here jump to that one just a sec. On the last page of our tutorial, we have a link to an example repository that shows a larger CRM application with more complex entity relations and implementations. Make sense?
Okay. Yeah. Thank you.
Cool. Let's see, just as it loads for a second. Let's give it a second to load. When you use Heroku free tier, it will penalty you 30 seconds load time whenever you first touch the website. So here is the CRM I was talking about. You have employees, you have contacts, you have notes, tags, and I was even bored enough to create drag and drop and all sorts of stuff. I always like drag and drop. It always seems magical to me. I don't know why. I'm old school.
So that's our customers.
Yeah. Okay, cool. So just like any other thing, I think that authentication and authorization is also something that is spread across the code. And I would much prefer it being defined on the entity where I'm talking about it, where I'm regarding it. So for example, if I want to allow access for this entity only for authenticated users, I can say here, allow dot authenticated, okay? And I would immediately get an 403 error saying, hey, you cannot access this resource. I can also create authorization based on roles saying, allow API delete admin, and then only admins will be allowed to post a delete call. Okay, now the implementation itself of the user management or role-based provider or whatever is outside Remult. Okay, all you need is that the Remult object will be aware of the user. You can set it in many ways. We can do later if we have some time. I can do some basic JWT implementation. But the idea here is that you still obey to the single source of truth. And this also affects the front end. Like, you know, all of these apps when you have again, someone allows delete just for an admin, but as a front-end developer, I write the duplication of this code. Okay, and later someone changes that, I don't remember to change the front end or the back end. So because this is part of the options that are given to the entity, I have access to that also for my front-end code. So I can go to the app TSX and say that I will show the delete indicator. Okay, let's do something like this here. Only if if task repo dot metadata dot delete is allowed. Okay, and that single definition in the task will also affect my front-end code. Does this make sense?
You can take
So,
it as a yes.
yes. So we are, 50 minutes into our presentation. I want to leave some time for questions. The rest of the authorization implementation is just, basic Node.js. You can use Passport, you can use JWT, you can choose pretty much whatever you like. We have more info of that, of course, on our tutorial. So you can come visit Remult and look at our tutorials and see other implementations here. If we'll have more time at the end and you still want me to implement it, I'll be happy to take you through that. Let me just return this for true so we can still play if someone has a relevant question. So does anyone have any other question at this time?
Does it have like the Remult? I saw on the invitation that you compared to Firebase, so how you can subscribe to any changes in the database? Is it possible?
So currently, we are working on developing a real-time database features on Remult. Okay, but until we do that, since you're completely in control of Express, you can expose HTTP server events and call them in the saving of the entity, and you'll get that kind of live notification of things that happen in the front end. We have a few code samples of that, but we are working on making it a first level member of Remult, where you can have an active query that will automatically get updated, and quite a few great ideas we have on that.
Perfect question, Ariel. Well, not much of a question, more of a encouraging disclaimer. I think Remult here is part of a very great, trend in the software engineering world of we call it serverless approach. I personally very much like Remult concept, but even more I like the serverless approach, which gives us all of us here on this bridge, even backend capabilities, even though that we are not backend developers. You can concentrate on your business logic. You can concentrate on the UI to make it nice and tidy and even pixel perfect, and skip all the hassle that we used to so much afraid of as a front-end developers, and let Remult do this magic for you. And I think it brings us as a front-end developers a lot of power, a lot of capabilities that were outside of our natural domains till recent times.
I fully agree. I come from, actually, I have a slide for that. Let me go and hit my last slide here. I think that now that we have the capability to write end-to-end applications, it's kind of a superpower. We can, I know it's a bit, with a lot of pathos or however you say that in English. Pathos is Hebrew, English, I don't know.
I guess
But
it's both.
yeah, but we can actually write end-to-end application within days or sometimes even hours and make a difference. We've written that food delivery apps. I never intended to change the way food is delivered in Israel. It was accidentally happened. And since I have Remult and creating a full stack app is something that takes days, I can use Heroku, where they provide us free hosting and free database for up to 10,000 rows, free Postgres database. So I can create many, many, many small applications to make a small difference. We have a guy in our town that rents or not that loans medical supply, like a wheelchair or crutches or whatever. So he needed something to manage that. Within 2 hours, I had an app for him. I wanted to manage my kids' allowance. I created an app for that. I wanted to my brother-in-law has a wine bottle collection. I spent a day. I wrote an app for him to manage that, and having that end-to-end capabilities. I always felt like backend was something complex that I need to secure and backup and manage and everything. And the world became so easy to do that. Heroku gives you an amazing experience. You just git push and it works. It's ridiculously simple. If you follow our tutorial, the last step is deploying to Heroku with a real database. So you see it's simple as git push, and Jay take care of everything. And I've never in my wildest dreamed imagined that I could support more than 300 NGOs, 500,000 deliveries per year with $16 a month. It's
Amazing.
insane.
It is indeed amazing. So guys, I hope this encourages you to at least play with it a little in your sandboxes projects, which most of you already spoke with in person and encourage them to develop one. And give your sandbox project some backend capabilities or some end-to-end or real-world capabilities, I'll say. Let me ask you one more time. Any questions come to mind, guys? Feel free to shout out.
Not question. I can say that it was very enjoyable to hear this lecture. I can tell that I enjoyed.
Thank
So
you.
thank you.
Thank you so much.
Yes, I would use the opportunity to thank you again, Noam and Yoni, for spending the time with us, and to first of all to develop it as an open source, to develop Remult as an open source for the community. I guess that's the first thank you. And the second one, that's as a developer. And then second, as an Amdocs employee, I thank you for joining us today and spend the time to give us this hands-on tutorial, tutorial. Hands-on coding, live coding is always challenging from the lecturer point of view. And I have to say it was super coherentic. I understood everything. From a personal level, I'll say that it was the best I could ask for as an audience.
If I just once tiny note from my side, like you said, this is an open source project, so we really encourage everyone who wants to come in, take a look at the source code documentation, comment, post issues, give us stars, everything. We're just eager to have people participating in the project. So anyone who likes it or has some spare time, we'd love that. We'd love that.
Perfect. And in the light of that, I also shared in our chat, in this meeting chat, a link to the Remult documentation site and also to the Remult repo on GitHub. So yeah, guys, contribute. Open source is the thing, we all contribute to each other. Even open issues is also a contribution. But I encourage you not just to open issues, but also to help and solve them, of course. But engage in the open source world. Engage with Remult. It's always great, and I know there are plenty of open source contributors here in this bridge. So here's another repo to target.
Perfect. So guys, I would like to thank you for spending the last hour with us. It was fun to show it to you guys. I love the questions, and I hope that all of you get a chance to play with Remult and if you get a chance to follow our task and even give us a star, it will help us keep up the the curve that we're trying to to support.
For sure. And we will definitely bear Remult in mind on our next hackathon. That's also for sure. I guess it's probably one of the best or the first go-to solutions when you come to a hackathon. And
yeah, we actually done. We participated a month ago in a 2 months ago, I think. We had a hackathon called Code for Ukraine, where people were encouraged to write software in the domain of helping the Ukrainian refugees all around and those that were coming to Israel. And first of all, it was an honor to be part of that hackathon. And we ended up using Remult to create a live solutions that work within a day and ended up winning that hackathon. So it was always fun.
That's cool. That's cool. Okay, guys, thank you everyone for joining. That was a very nice and refreshing tech talk. Thank you once again, Yoni and Noam, for joining. Thank you everyone who stopped their working on their tasks and joined this tech talk. And catch you again on our next tech talk. Stay tuned, guys.
Thank you very much. Bye-bye.
Thank you, everyone. Bye-bye.